Okay, we're going to look at the module within this session that's titled Math Instruction. Um, so I've posted here, first there's an article here about what does good math instruction look like. I'm not going to read the entire article to you, but I want to point out my favorite part of it. So if we scroll down to the last page, this section here with these bullet points that highlights an effective mathematics environment. So these are all important. So we want to demonstrate acceptance of students' divergent ideas. So as we said before, there's always more than one way to solve a problem. So we're trying to challenge students to think more deeply and to be able to explain their solutions. So we really want to be encouraging in that the idea here of sharing. Another aspect would be to influence learning by posing challenging and interesting questions. So teachers should present questions that are stimulating and engage students. We want to invoke problem-solving capabilities. And then another aspect would be project a positive attitude about mathematics and about students' ability to do mathematics. I talked about that in the other video, but definitely your attitude is contagious and you want to make sure that it's worth catching. Students are actively engaged in doing mathematics, okay? They should definitely be using manipulatives. We talked about that in the other session. They should be, it should be an active process. It shouldn't just be sitting back and watching you do problems on the board. They need to be working with the information and crunching the numbers. Another aspect would be that students are solving challenging problems. Okay, again, we want to develop the habit that they're able to persevere, that they're able to build resiliency, that they're able to work through a problem that takes them a while, and that it's not just a quick solution. I think for this generation of learners, that is challenging. That the answer, that sometimes you're not just going to quickly arrive at an answer, and that you really need to work through that. So it's important to model that. It's important to practice it. And then finally, my favorite of everything here is the interdisciplinary connections and examples that are used to teach mathematics. As we already know that we're working on developing our own interdisciplinary units. I think it's important for students to be able to see that there are real world connections, and that math is all around us. So I think that any time that you have that ability to make cross-curricular connections, it's really important. All right, so that's that one article. You can read the rest of it on your own. The next article actually is this one from Edutopia on 6 ways to help students, help them understand math better. I like this article here, so it gives you 6 different strategies, and which I like this article because it ties into developing lesson plans. So he starts off with acknowledging that you should have an effective class opener, like an anticipatory set, an introduction that engages students, that draws them in, gets their curiosity. I think it's important for students to know what they're going to be learning about. And, if you can somehow grab their attention, that's all the better. He has little videos. I'm not going to click on them now, but you can watch them on your own. But he has videos for demonstrating how to do each of the 6 different suggestions here. Talks about introducing topics with multiple representations, as well as solving problems in many ways. So we've already said that there's lots of different ways to solve math problems, and that it's important for students to be able to share their thought process for tackling them. There's another video there for how he encourages students to find multiple ways to solve problems. As I just mentioned before, showing that real-world application is also so important, making those connections. He talks about having students communicate their reasoning. In the younger grades, we would refer to this as like math talks or math stories. It's great to have students, develop their understanding of number sense through storytelling. That it makes it more applicable to them. So, you might have students talk about, using like Pete the Cat and some of his stories. He's got one on like cupcakes or something like that, where, cupcakes disappear, but, so having students kind of relate to the storytelling aspect of math so that they're able to make those connections. I had 10 cupcakes and I gave 3 to my friends, so now I only have 7 left, so that that's making more of a connection than just saying, oh, what's 10 minus 7, right? And then finally finishing the class with a summary. So like having a closure to your lesson, which is a great thing to plan for. Sometimes the best laid plans don't always work out, but it's good to think about how you can kind of wrap up your lesson. How are you going to check for understanding? Can you have a formative assessment? Maybe it's an exit ticket, or students have to summarize, what they learned there. Maybe you're going to have students get started on their homework so that you can check in to make sure that they're all on the right track. Maybe you're going to present information for, kind of give them a tidbit for what's going to be covered in the next lesson. But yeah, so he kind of gives an example here of, wrapping up your lessons. All right, and then there's a little blog here that kind of an article from that talks about how math is done differently throughout the world, which I think is fascinating because again, there's always more than one way to do math, and in different countries, math is presented in different ways. I think this is a good thing to know because you might have students from different countries or different cultural backgrounds, and that the way that they do math within their own homes might be a little different than the way that you're presenting it in class, which could cause a discrepancy in understandings. So it's a good thing to think about. I included a little video here about like a different way of doing multiplication. There are so many different ways that you could teach multiplication. I just thought it would be giving you some food for thought here, something to think about, that there's a lot of different methods for things, and it's not necessarily that one's better than another, but they're just different. I thought this was a fun video for you to kind of check out. All right, next we're going to talk about problem solving strategies. So I do think that it is important to explicitly teach problem solving strategies. I think there are basic steps to start off with, which is what I have here. So George Ploila is a famous mathematician. He was a well-respected mathematician from like the 50s. And he wrote this book, How to Solve It. But his real basic problem solving strategies starts with understanding the problem. And he does go into more depth about like, what does that mean to understand the problem? We're going to talk about vocabulary later, but understanding the words in the problem, really understanding what the question is asking you to do. Second step would be to devise a plan, and there's lots of different ways that you can go about devising a plan. Third step is to carry out that plan, which kind of seems obvious. And then the fourth step would be to look back. Did you miss anything? Did you actually answer the question? And going from there. If you continue to scroll down here, it kind of goes a little bit more in depth, slightly more in depth into those 4 parts of the problem solving strategy. However, for an even more in-depth look at problem solving strategies, I've included another document there. Where is it? This one, problem solving strategies. It's long. I'll admit it's long, but it's an easy read, and it's a good reference, tool for you to look at. They really take those 4 steps and expand on them. So let me just bring up like the table of contents here so you can at least see. So here, understanding the problem. So they talk about different ways, things that you could use to help you understand the problem. Same thing with devising a plan. They go into each of these different methods for how that might look, like choosing a plan that would work for a particular word problem, and then implementing your solution, and then being able to reflect on the problem. So there's lots of different strategies here, and they actually give you examples in here, which is nice for you to check out. So I like this page here, step 1, understanding the problem. So they show you a 12 different ways that you could do that. Step 2, 8 different ways there, right? So anyway, you can take your time to look through that, see if there's anything that you might find relevant for teaching problem solving strategies in your classroom. I've also included There's a little video that kind of demonstrates, you want to encourage students to be persistent in problem solving, to really persevere. I think we're in a generation where kids are so used to just being able to have an immediate answer. Like you can Google anything and get an answer, right? But to really have to work through a problem, it's important for you to model that. It's important for them to sometimes, struggle. That it's going to take a little time for them to do some stuff. So that's important. Speaking of word problems, to help students develop critical thinking skills, taking problems that would normally be like a one answer, like 5 + 3, equals 8, and changing that into an open-ended sort of problem where the kids actually have to think more deeply about the concept. So instead of saying just what is 5 + 3, saying, all right, well, what are different ways that we can get to 8, right? And then that could lead them back to thinking about number bonds and, different ways that they can get to 8, and having to actually put it into an example as well. So anyway, so they give you some examples here about like what a closed-ended problem might look like. So for example, here with just, again, which of the following numbers are prime, right? So that's really easy. You could just, look at this, pick out a one number and decide which one's prime, right? But here they're expanding it, that they're saying Fred thinks that 57 and 67 are prime because they both end in 7, which is a prime number. But Dick says he's wrong. Who is correct and why? So now they got to really do some thinking about the problem and be able to explain their answer. So that is really a crucial part to understanding, to applying math, those math concepts, right? Once we've gotten past the concrete stage. All right, and then we get into talking about making math fun, right? So there's a couple of videos here to kind of demonstrate that. I've included a couple of links here for, I think, math tricks. It's fun to, show kids some shortcuts, I think, after they've learned, the concrete concepts and have that really down and have mastered it. Because, again, I think, math is magical, and there's all sorts of different ways that you can approach solving problems, and sometimes by knowing some tricks and some shortcuts, it can come in handy. So anyway, so that's a fun site to kind of check out on your own. And then I've also included a link there. I put together just a few, I just pulled a few games off the top of my head that we sometimes play in my classroom. Math games are a great way to engage students. These are just some easy peasy ones. So yeah, I have all sorts of different types of 24 games, where the kids have to, you have a card and you have to use the different operations to get to the number 24. And that's great because that goes from, basic operations all the way up to algebra, where you're doing stuff with square roots and exponents and that kind of stuff. Logic puzzles are super fun. TED Ed videos are great. When you're getting into coordinate planes and graphing, Battleship is always fun. Different versions of I Have and Who Has, and it's like another card game. There's so many different ways that you can use that. So there's examples there. It's kind of fun. You can always play War when you're learning about place values. You can also do that with fractions. So a lot of different ways that you can make math fun by using games. I actually use games in my classroom at least once a chapter, for sure. Before we get to the end of the chapter, we always have a game day where I'll set up like different centers that have different games that tie into, whatever standard we were covering. And the kids think it's a lot of fun. And then the last thing that I posted in this section is on feedback, which they used to have more on this site that I posted there on feedback, but I'll just say that feedback's important for students. Make timely feedback in particular is important, especially, if a student has practiced a problem, doing problems wrong, and you didn't catch it and you didn't give them feedback in a timely manner, for them to, continue doing something wrong, it really ends up being a problem in the end, because then you gotta like unteach it. So always trying to check in with students to gauge where they're at and give them immediate feedback is important. All right, well, I'll stop there with this video, and in the next one, we will talk about the next section. All right, thanks.